Yeah, fuck it. Should we do it? Do you know the words? Should we sing a bit of Kate Bush?
No, I don't know Kate Bush. Is that the one you're singing?
Cliff. It's me, I'm Kathy. I've come home.
Oh, man, this
So
book.
cold, open the window.
Hello and welcome to On the Same Page, a podcast in which two mates separated by oceans and hemispheres talk about books and catch each other up on life between the lines. Unfortunately, we can't get together in person, but through this podcast, we hope to get on the same page.
Okay, well. Welcome to On the Same Page. My name is Blake. Joining me today is Seamus. How are you, Shame?
Very well. It is Sunday morning here, looking a bit drab and dreary outside, but happy to be podcasting as always with you. How are you going, Blake?
Not too shabby. It is drab and dreary here. A dark, ominous, some might say Moorish night in the prison, otherwise known as Berlin. And today we are discussing Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering Heights.
One of
Yes.
the great novels of the 19th century. But before we crack into it, we should start with Inner Shelf, as we always do. Did you have a nice Inner
Yes.
Shelf moment this week?
I had a few, but I've gone with this one. Me and my girlfriend were talking about names, and specifically the name Karen. So we're talking about Karen, like when when you're being a Karen, and we were talking about whether that name will eventually subside into just a regular name again and become just a normal Karen, or if it will in fact stop being a name and become more a derogatory term, I guess, for someone throwing a little tantrum. Is it just going to eventually stop being a name within 50 years or something and just be Karen, the Karen?
No, I think it's got to be dying out. It's going the way of Adolf.
But do you think, because Adolf has completely died out, do you think it'll remain as someone that's then throwing a fight and it becomes like it gets removed as a name and becomes more a term of someone fighting?
Yeah, I mean, it's already there. I mean, if someone's like chucking a tantrum or being a real Karen, you're like, that's such a Karen thing. That's why it's become so useful so quickly. And you see on Facebook, there's like groups of Karens who have like joined together to protest the use of Karen. It's like, that's such a Karen thing to do. I don't know. And it's just, I mean, I feel sorry. I know very nice Karens who are nothing like the kind of,
Angry Karens.
The blonde streaked, short.
Show me to the manager.
American woman at a theater, at a diner or something, asking to see the manager because her eggs weren't done right, even though they cost like $1.33. Like, what are you talking about, Karen? But I've never met a Karen who fits that description, but it's just such a opposite fitting name for some reason.
Yeah.
In an American context, obviously, as well. I don't know. In Australia, it'd probably be something like, Kayleen or something annoying like that. And
Kayleen.
That was the name of my first car.
Yeah, Kayleen the Cream Machine.
The Cream Machine herself. She was a feisty bitch. But I think Karen is gone. Yeah, it's become. I mean, there's other names in the kind of language, I guess, which have lost their nominative status and become kind of general terms, I guess.
Like dick.
Did that start as the name and then become?
I think so. Yeah.
Really? Oh, okay.
Richard to Dick, and then Dick to Dick.
Is that how it happened, though? Is this?
I'm 99% sure now. Now that you're questioning
really?
it, I'm not sure.
we need
our
who was the Richard though? Was it Richard III? Everyone's like, "Guy's a dick."
Yeah, it could be.
And so ever since then, it's just been Richard.
We need an apprentice
arsehole.
to like yell at to Google these things while we're podcasting.
Yeah. We need Susie Dent. We need a lexicographer to come in here and tell us where the dick for penis comes from, and who knows. I remember there was I think a New South Wales minister of something in the 90s called Richard Face.
Oh.
Do you remember that guy?
No, that's unfortunate.
His parents were obviously ignorant.
Yeah. Parents obviously didn't like him.
Mm-hmm.
So what about you? Did you have any inner shelf moments this week?
I had a couple, and I actually just changed what I was going to... some ideas I'd had earlier in the week because I was going through my bookshelves to pick out some books I hadn't read for upcoming, hopefully, depending on not getting COVID, holiday. And in Berlin, there is lots of people just leave their shit in the streets. Like, you know, they'll put a little cardboard box of books or CDs or something. If they move, they don't want to take stuff. They just write Zuverschenken, free to take. And so you're walking around, and most times you go for a stroll around Berlin, you'll see at least one Zuverschenken box, and often you'll find something. And so I found lots of things I found a complete Dramas of Camus in German, which was fun to read.
I was going to say, yeah.
And I found some other things. But anyway, one of the books I found, which I haven't read, which I don't remember when I picked it up, but I certainly wouldn't have bought it myself, is Neil Gaiman's American Gods. Hold it up for you there.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just flipping through. I was just going to read a couple of pages, and then I saw an inscription from a previous owner or someone who gave this book as a gift. There's an inscription written to someone, which I won't read, but I was going to actually look up this person and see what their deal was, but I forgot. But then there's also a poem, and it's quite a good poem.
Yeah.
So, I was like, wow, has this person just like written a poem in full? And I looked up some of the lines and couldn't find any reference to it, but there's some pretty good lines in it. So I thought I'd just give it a little read. Anonymous poem. Well, it's not anonymous. I have the name, but I just won't reveal it.
Yeah.
I'll look. If I can check into the person, find them on LinkedIn or something, and maybe there'll be a part 2. Maybe they've got more poems for us.
Long lost love story starting.
Perhaps. I won't give her last name, but her first name is Justine.
Hello, Justine.
So, yeah. And the poem goes. It's in quite a unique. Well, not unique, but certain cursive, so hopefully I won't make any mistakes here. Souls that wander are never lost, only lonely, yearning to find another soul, to find another soul, to find the light that balances the dark, shed the weight, hold close to your heart, untether your spirit into the void, release your heart's anguish of relationships destroyed. Let your soul feel the lightness within, brace your identity for the changing winds. Impacted by the ripples in the water you swim, let it carry you to far lands, fill you up to the brim. When the open road becomes your home, you decide to look back. Remember, a moment is destined when you decide to act.
Damn. I would not be complaining if I got a book as a gift and then opened it up and there was a nice little poem just for me.
I mean, yeah, and there's just great line. I mean, I love this last little couplet. Remember, a moment is destined when you decide to act. Very profound.
Yeah.
I like it very much. Yeah, I didn't see it very well. It needs a bit of grammatical editing. I think.
Here we go, listeners.
Bit of line adjustment. There's some enjambment which doesn't really work quite well. I won't get my poetic knickers in a bunch, but that was my inner shell. So yeah, and today we are talking about Wuthering Heights, and for anyone who hasn't read this book, obviously there will be some spoilers coming up, but I imagine a lot of people may have encountered it in school or something. It's often on reading lists and things like that. So, and it still, I think, remains one of the time has demonstrated one of the great novels ever written. So we should probably do a bit of a plot overview anyway. So I think you've got something for us there.
I wrote a little thing down. I know you have one as well, so if you think there's any key moments I've missed, feel free to chuck them in. but Wuthering Heights is told retrospectively by the housekeeper Nellie. She's telling the tale to the occupant Mr. Lockwood, who has rented Thrushcross Grange. She tells the story about two families, the Earnshaws and the Lintons, who are part of the landed gentry living on the moors in West Yorkshire. Mr. Earnshaw adopts the young Heathcliff. From here, the story mostly follows Heathcliff and his childhood of being bullied, falling in love with Catherine Earnshaw, learning he won't be able to marry Catherine due to his social status until he leaves, acquires a mass fortune, returns to win Catherine. She unfortunately dies, so Heathcliff starts a long, long, long life of revenge. And that's kind of where you can leave it. And we'll probably address more as the podcast goes on.
That's a pretty comprehensive overview. It's a very intricate plot. It's got lots of little byways and aspects to it. I guess there's two major sections. There's the leading up to Catherine Earnshaw's death, and then there's the kind of offspring, the younger generation, which
the two generations,
and that's the second half. And so, like you said, there's two narrators. Lockwood's the first one. He's this kind of outsider, middle class type character which comes in. And so, I mean, it's brilliantly structured, the novel, because you do the way these two narrators are set up, because you have one narrator which requires the whole story, and one narrator who's also ignorant of how strange these two kind of properties 4 miles from each other across the moors are. And his engagement, when he first comes to rent this property at Thrushcross Grange and goes to visit his landlord who lives at Wuthering Heights across the moors, and he finds this very strange setup, and then he kind of has a dream or doesn't have a dream and gets involved in this tussle with a ghost, a la Kate Bush is knocking at the window. It's me, I'm coming, I've come home. When she's, trying to get in, and so that very interested, and then he kind of catches a cold, fucking legs it from Wuthering Heights as early as possible the next morning, because he's like, fuck, that's
a weird place,
weirdos.
And
it is very weird. That's what really, Bronte sets up Wuthering Heights as kind of darkness and chaos and unsettling, and the servants and the master eat at the same table. Everyone speaks in Yorkshire dialect and all this kind of stuff. And then Thrushcross Grange is calm and peaceful, and the society is ordered. The servants know their place. The master has his place, etc., etc. And so you have this big chaos of light, this big structure of light and dark, and then the limbo purgatory of the moors between. And so he goes back, and then Nellie, who's the housekeeper at Thrushcross Grange, was formerly employed at Wuthering Heights and then has been intimately involved the whole time. And so you get this lovely fly on the wall recount of what's happened, and it's so well done, and has all sorts of byways and avenues, and it's one of these great novels which has kind of everything in it. Also, we should probably mention that the Mr. Earnshaw, the previous master of Wuthering Heights, he goes to Liverpool one day on some kind of whim. I think he says he walks there or something, and it's like some epic long walk. And he comes back with this little dark-skinned, dark-haired kid. Obviously, Liverpool, big slave port, ships coming in from China and India and all over the world and stuff. So, you're never told who this kid is or what his deal is. And he's initially raised,
don't know, like his second name, young lord, or age, just Heathcliff.
Nothing. Just Heathcliff, and he's initially raised as a lord would be raised, educated, and then that Earnshaw dies, and goes to Hindley, the oldest son, who resents Heathcliff because the father probably loved Heathcliff a bit more for being this kind of very precocious kid, and then so Heathcliff gets reduced to servitude, and he just plows the land, and he's just a servant in the house,
locked in the attic, and
but him and Caitlin form this epic emotional intense bond, the kind of defining bond of high romanticism, descendant from it's Byron's bond with his it's Wordsworth, early Wordsworth, it's really high romance, and I don't know, adored this book. I had never read it before this week. I think I'd always avoided it for very simple reasons. Just the fact that basically I don't like Moors.
That's fair.
Hound of the Baskervilles, Great Expectations, Ted Hughes poetry. It's just uneasy for the very reason that it's so useful and well worked by by both the Brontes, all three of the Brontes, but especially by Emily, is the unsettling kind of
the fog
aspect of it. You know, put me in a typhoon, put me in a tempest on a desert island, put me anywhere. But the Moors, it's like, ugh, what is this place? I don't like it at all.
I love the Moors.
Oh God, no! It's just so northern. I just don't have a northern soul. But it is. So for that very reason, I've just literally just been like, ugh, Wuthering Heights, Moors. That's just not my vibe.
Yeah.
You know, and there's obviously I've read it now, and I completely agree. It's one of the greatest novels ever written. And I had read Emily Bronte's poetry before, which is very similar in a way, but less Maury.
yeah.
But this is a real prose. That's what Virginia Woolf said of this book. It's a prose poem. She's the same as Jane Eyre, actually.
Yeah.
But it is extremely poetic. The writing is extraordinarily both kind of like high Baroque romance, but incredibly tempered to the fact that what I was so surprised at to begin with is actually, though the Moors are so present, she really doesn't do much brushwork for them. She doesn't really talk about the Moors much at all. It's kind of referred to in the sides or in the sidelings of other aspects. Like Catherine's talking about a dream and she will mention the Moors and aspects of it. But it's really not the kind of central... It is the central vibe of the book, but Bronte doesn't have to do much, doesn't overwork it to make it so. She's very delicate with the way she presents it.
She is.
But yeah, how did you come to this book?
I saw it on my bookshelf and I read the blurb and thought, yeah, that sounds interesting.
The old-fashioned way.
Yeah. But if you had to, because we both have just read it just recently, if you had to sum it up in one word, what would that word be?
In one word. Intensity.
Okay.
Which is why I like it. I'm all about intensity. I mean, but what's yours?
Disappointing.
Oh, no.
I did not like it.
Okay, here we go. We've got a bit of conflict to get this podcast going.
I did not like it at all.
All right, what didn't you like about it?
So much I didn't like about it. I think my big issue with these kind of books is I hate how proper they are, and so many of their issues could just be resolved with a simple, honest conversation. And it's the same when I was reading Northanger Abbey recently. You're just like, just say what you actually think just once, and the next 30 pages will be redundant. And it's the same when I watched what's that Netflix show? Bridgerton. Exactly the same. Like they're really dramatic for no reason. But obviously going into a book of this sort of time period, I was aware of that, so I can forgive that because it is different. And as you say, the language is the only thing I reckon that kept me going. It's fantastic prose. It's incredibly poetic. It's visceral. I loved it. But I just think she set the story up for so many different things, and every time we got to a fork in a road where I thought this is getting interesting, I feel like she took the wrong fork and just took the story away that I was not happy with. And yeah, so that's sort of what I didn't like about it. I guess I'll talk about the forks in the road as they sort of naturally come up throughout the podcast, but it was a disappointing story for me. It didn't vibe with it at all. Every time we came to the fork in the road, I was like, go left, please, go left, and then no, we went right. So yeah, that's it. That's what I didn't like about it, although I didn't really reveal what I don't like. I'll give you the first one because very early in the story we're at Wuthering Heights, and you've got Mr. Lockwood narrating the story, and he gets to Wuthering Heights, and it's all a bit sort of everyone's fucking depressed. and really weird, and they say you can't stay, like they when he goes to sleep they put him in that room, and you sort of, there's mystery around the room and you don't know what's going on, and then he reads the diary and has the dream and the vision of Catherine, and he sees the ghost, and I was like, oh sick, this is going to be like this kind of tormenting story of, you know, ghosts and everything, and we're on the moors, as you say, there's going to be ghosts involved, it's going to be a bit mythical and everything, a bit of magical realism and everything, but no, that just pitters out into nothing. And I was like, fuck, that sucked. So that was my first issue with the book. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I like when people can have dialectical positions, because I mean, there's lots of general aspects of the book which I don't, you know, vibe with. The setting is just not my preferred setting for books. It doesn't really speak to me, and I have no emotional connection with that kind of setting. But in terms of someone who I've been for a very long time, been very interested in romanticism and in the philosophy of love, and in this kind of period of writing and what was going on and how people's minds were changing, how art was changing, Ruskin and Turner, and how, you know, I'm a massive fan of D.H. Lawrence, and D.H. Lawrence comes very strongly from Emily Brontë. All nature writing kind of comes from Emily Brontë in a way. And I guess, you know, I knew a lot about the Brontes just because they're such major literary figures, and I've kind of, so always coming across Wuthering Heights or coming across Jane Eyre and talking about the Brontes and their history and all this kind of stuff. So I had this larger general concept, I guess, of context going into Wuthering Heights, which was then, you know, I had lots of episodes in reading where I was like, oh, okay, that fills in that gap. Now I know why people put Emily in that space and Jane in this space, and etc. And I think, you know, I admired the plotting. I admired the intricacy of what she tried to do, but mainly it was just the ideas. And I think even Jane, you know, said that people will realize in eventually that that Emily was an essayist, really, that she was a writer of ideas. And what she's getting at is she's really evolving the whole concept of love in this book. She's revolutionizing everything we think about love wasn't thought about until Bronte came along. The whole idea of levels, you know, none of this, you know, no, I love Jane Austen, and, you know, well, you mentioned Bridgerton, that whole, you know, the period of, you know, let's get married, and that's the basic be all and end all and all this kind of thing. And here Emily Bronte comes along and says, well, there's actually big levels to this idea, and there's lots of different kinds of love. You know, Fitzgerald comes along 50, 60 years later, or 80 years later, and says, you know, there's all sorts, there's millions of kinds of loves, but never the same love twice. I mean, he got that from Bronte, because what happens is Catherine has this incredibly intense bond, which is not just superficial or social or anything. It's pre-social, pre-race, foundational for Heathcliff, and vice versa. And she betrays it when it comes to the point where she chooses the more socially acceptable route, the kind of social love. Yes, she loves him in a way, Edgar. She thinks he's fine. He's a nice guy. There's nothing wrong with him. But she's betraying her feelings. And that is the central point of the book. She betrayed her feelings, and therefore all sorts of mayhem and chaos comes afterwards. It's Milton, you know, it's a kind of retelling of, you know, what happens when you get kicked out of heaven. She talks about that she has a dream where she felt she didn't belong in heaven because she was going to betray Heathcliff's love, and that she was going to be cast out and become this kind of wandering ghost on the moors, which is what does happen. And, you know, you say that like the whole ghost thing never comes to anything, but the whole book, Heathcliff is haunted by her. He's haunted by her love, and her ghost is unable to depart, is unable to settle, unable to unquiet slumbers, as the book finished. You know, they finally get to. So I think that's a major part of the book is that previously, because of circumstance, how tough life was and all these other reasons, people didn't really consider trusting their own feelings as a major concern. And they're just saying, you marry someone so that you can get your money, so that you don't starve, so you can have somewhere to live, property, all these kind of very practical Victorian things or pre-Victorian things. And Emily's saying, well, hold on, this is what happens if you betray your feelings, you do the wrong thing, then actually the whole course of your life is going to be chaotic and a kind of purgatory because of this one decision you've made.
I did love Catherine. I thought she was probably my favourite character in the book, and I thought her death, like that entire section, was probably my favourite part in the book, because to me she very much represented, like, she betrayed her inner self, and then that's when Heathcliff is like, you killed yourself, like you didn't follow what your heart wanted, you're now dying because you've made the wrong choice. It's not anything else. And that's obviously a very, very deep thought, in that you've got to do what your heart desires, or you will end up killing yourself because you're not doing what you truly want to do. So I loved all that. And I get that she haunted the moors and everything. I was like, oh yeah, but it's to me, the revenge that followed her death, because it goes for like 18 years, was just overdone.
Yeah, I mean, it's melodramatic, I guess, but
it's just cruel for.
I think the second half is much more boring than the first. I agree with you there. I think the first half is much better. I don't think it's shocking. I think it's it gives it more of a. I mean, it's kind of you either have the central drama, you have the episode, which is the kind of cleft in the earth. And then if you just end it there, or you kind of just sum everything up really quickly, then you don't get the point, which is Emily Brontë saying life goes on, and the ramifications continue year after year after year, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and it proceeds through generations. The decisions made and secrets kept and betrayals made in follow down generations, that nothing just stops. Time doesn't work that way. Time is not this just kind of present moment and then fades thing. There is this kind of ancestral memory which feeds in, and the kind of ripples continue to go. I think this is a good time for a quote, because I think one of the quotes I was going to say, which is obviously one of the most quoted sections, is when Nellie and Catherine are having a conversation, and she's kind of Catherine's telling Nellie that Heathcliff's the love of her life, but she's going to marry Edgar.
Yep.
And for part of this conversation, Heathcliff is eavesdropping, but he only hears the bad part where she says that she's going to marry Edgar, and then he doesn't hear the good part where she says some of the stuff I'm about to quote. And of course, once he hears this, he bails for 3 years, and he's gone without explanation, and then comes back loaded. That was another thing I didn't
like, but we can get to that after the quote.
We can, yeah, we'll get to that after the quote. So I'll just jump in here so I don't go on too long. This is Catherine talking to Nellie. I've no more business to marry Edgar Linton than I have to be in heaven, and if the wicked man in there had not brought Heathcliff so low, I shouldn't have thought of it. It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now. So he shall never know that how I love him, and that not because he's handsome, Nellie, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, and Linton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning, or frost from fire. And then she goes on a little bit later. I cannot express it, but surely you and everybody have a notion that there is, or should be, an existence of yours beyond you. What was the use of creation if I were entirely contained here? My great miseries in this world have been Heathcliff's miseries, and I watched and felt each from the beginning. My great thought in living is himself. If all else perished and he remained, I should still continue to be. And if all else remained and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger. I should not seem a part of it. My love for Linton is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it. I'm well aware, as winter changes the trees. but my love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of my visible delight, but necessary. Nelly, I am Heathcliff. He's always in my mind, not as a pleasure any more than I am always a pleasure to myself, but as my own being. And so, yeah, the message is clear, and it follows from her talking about this dream she has, where she goes to heaven, and she feels like she doesn't belong there because of what she's about to do, and she says she's cast out of heaven, very Miltonian. And the message being, if you deny love, if you deny yourself, and she is Heathcliff because they are one and the same, then you will be cast out of heaven into the unending torment of hell, and that's the destiny of the characters thereafter. It's a very romantic idea, something I think is very true, and it comes very strongly from Wordsworth, that idea of, the rocks and the foliage, and that, she can deal, Edgar's like, yeah, okay, I love the leaves, but they change, and then they'll fall and whatever else. But Heathcliff is the rocks. He is underneath, below. He's permanent in her. He is there. They've kind of, their souls have morphed into a, it's not platonic. It's not like, oh, we're two halves of something and we connect. There's a deep kind of webbing that's happened, a lacing together. And once they've been separated, they've become frayed and they go all over the place. And so I think that's the real kind of cleave in the novel, that little section. And then, as you said, she goes on to marry Edgar, and then she's about to give birth to little Catherine, and little Cathy. He comes back after 3 years abroad, cashed up to the brink, and bent on revenge. Yeah, which I loved. I mean, this book came out the year before Count of Monte Cristo. It's very similar in that it's a revenge story, and Count of Monte Cristo is exactly the same. Like, he gets wronged, he goes off, he finds a big fortune, and then comes back hell bent on revenge. And maybe that was like something that sort of set me up for failure, because in Count of Monte Cristo, he's very much a gentleman. He's like, I'm here to get revenge on the 3 people that wronged me, kind of thing, and that's it. Otherwise, I'm just like this very flamboyant, lovely person that sort of is friends with everyone, is so charming, can charm the pants off anyone, fabulously wealthy. Whereas Heathcliff is just a bummer. He just becomes this huge bummer. But something I didn't like was he goes away for 3 years and comes back with a fortune, and then you just never find out. Like, there's all this mystery around Heathcliff, and you just never get any of the answers. And I guess I just hate that. I want to know where he got his fortune from. I want to know his backstory. And right at the end, Nelly touches on it again. I think it's the last chapter. She's like, there's this man in front of me, and like I raised him from a kid. I don't even know his age. I don't know his last name. Like, there's still so much mystery around him. And I was like, give me the answers. I want the answers. But God, no. I mean, I think that's the point of it. The point of it, and the greatness of it is its ambiguity, is its mystery. And, Emily was a mystic in a lot of ways. And I think, she is able to show that just in this small little 2 nooks, basically everything happens in 2 kitchens of 2 houses. Yeah. If suddenly the story fucks off to New South Wales goldfields, or to the American West or something like that, because it's middle of the Victorian period. Someone fucks off from England and they come back with a lot of cash. They've gone to the Empire. I mean, it's not much of a mystery. He's done some bad shit, probably. He's fucked up some people, probably traded some people. Yeah, but that's a different story. I mean, I haven't read Count of Monte Cristo, and obviously by all accounts, and yours especially, it's a masterpiece. But a revenge story is philosophically very boring, because revenge is impossible. It leads you nowhere. It's unself-fulfilling. You just do it, and then you're like, oh, that actually didn't fix the thing that I thought it was going to fix. It's an impossible, when literature comes and it admits that revenge is this impossible end, then you start to get into the realm of profundity. And I think that's what, he comes in, and his idea of revenge, and you also remember this is the Victorian period, and how obsessed the whole idea of the book is with property, And of course, that Heathcliff's great revenge is going to be property. Not only is he going to take Wuthering Heights from Hindley, but he's going to take Thrushcroft Grange from Edgar, and which he eventually does. And then in the end, the final chapters, he casts all the material world beside. He said, I don't give a shit about it. Get rid of it. I spent years completing this great revenge upon multiple generations, and it comes to nothing. I'm still haunted by love, and all I can do is just dig up this chick and try and get next to her because I'm a Helen Necro weirdo.
Yeah,
but
that was an odd scene.
Even that, yeah. I mean, he is quite a demented person. He's demented by his loss, but I commiserate with him, and that's, I think, what's so also fantastic about Wuthering Heights is that there is, and what about lots of great literature, or perhaps all great literature, it makes it very hard to judge. She's not a great moralizer. I mean, in Lawrence and stuff, you get more of a moralizing, not moralizing, but a moral trajectory. Where in Wuthering Heights, the moral high ground, if there is one, is the middle ground. You can't completely hate Heathcliff because even though no matter how violent and the domestic violence is brutal, his cruelty is brutal to Isabella. Lots of the shit he does is brutal, but he's been treated cruelly, and he's in a pain which has never before been depicted in literature. Not since Othello. I mean, it's and I think that's also part of the melodrama. Is it comes not just out of the Romantics, but it comes from the Elizabethans. So this is not it's not supposed to be believable in the dramatic sense. You can be as dramatic as you want. What makes it believable, I guess, is the fact that you do have this ambiguity in characters. Nellie isn't completely trustworthy. Lockwood isn't completely trustworthy as a narrator. And yet this. That Isabella is... Firstly, all these people are like 19 and 20 when this shit happens. Like, if any of this shit happened to me when I was 19, 20, I wouldn't know fuck. Like, I would be like, what are you talking about? Like, give me a break. I'm going to go and, like, watch TV. Like, and the amount of death that goes on and all this kind of stuff. And of course, the amount of property. Emily went to a lot of effort to make sure the property rights for everything was at the time, and how the property was divided them up. Obviously it goes to men, and it depends, her father, it's incredibly gendered and classed to the brink, all those kind of things. And so she gets all that. She touches upon all these things. It's also, there's the revenge of the Empire Strikes Back. This is a little kid who's mixed race probably, and he's found on the streets, semi-raised as a kind of lord, but then re-abandoned again, and then he comes back and takes revenge upon all these people who have wronged him. There's just so many levels, and I think that's what it's just a great philosophical novel. It's not gonna be this great story, and I can see why someone might even be disappointed with the ending, where it kind of ends on a positive note. But I mean, it was a Victorian novel. The whole idea of Victorian novels is that it perks your spirits up a bit at the end.
Yeah, no, I like the ending actually.
Yeah, it's fine, I guess. It could have, who knows what if Emily might have done a sequel or something.
I know, that's sort of the annoying thing, is that obviously I'm saying I'm disappointed, and like, her writing style was fantastic. I think there's some solid ideas there, but it was her first book, and that's something that she would have only gotten better with time. And unfortunately, she passed away.
It could have also been a one-off. I mean,
it could have been. But unlikely. That quote you read, she's like, obviously, that's why I was there the whole time. That language was peak. That was brilliant.
Yeah, and she, read the poetry, very good, and obviously her and the Brontes, the other Bronte sisters, they had this whole imagined world of these islands in the Pacific, Gongal, all this kind of stuff. They were writing in this imaginary land all the time, and they were very insular. They weren't part of the literary scene. They weren't out there like Dickens, like pumping up their name all the time and stuff. They were just artists, especially Emily. She was the most artistic of the three surviving sisters. And Emily died when she was 30. By the time she was 10, she'd lost her two older sisters and her mother, and her brother died of alcoholism, like Hindley. And just imagine the pressure on an artistic mind of that level. To produce anything is astounding. To produce something so beautiful out of so much misery, and something so devoted to the idea of essential first passion love. I don't know. It's, I mean, quite an astounding feat. And, you know, I guess there's, and that's another thing actually, which might also explain why it's so melodramatic in the Heathcliff sense, is that one of the most revolutionary things about this at the time is that a man gets to be as passionate and melodramatic in his emotions as a woman. And
that's something I did like about it. And my favourite scene was when Heathcliff, he sort of already knows she's dead, but he's in the garden and it's sort of confirmed that she's dead by Nellie. And that was definitely my favourite scene. I've got the quote here, actually.
Yeah, hit me up.
So she's just died and he's in his fury. Catherine Earnshaw, may you not rest as long as I am living. You said I killed you. Haunt me then. The murdered do haunt their murderers. I believe, I know that ghosts have wandered the earth. Be with me always. Take any form. Drive me mad. Only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you. Oh God, it's unutterable. I cannot live without my life. I cannot live without my soul. And that, to me, that was a fantastic... I mean, the whole first half of the book I did like. I'll admit that. And that scene was just... Because, like I said, I don't like how they are sort of never honest with themselves. But in that scene, he was just so honest. He was incredibly powerful. And that's easily my favourite scene of the book. He just became a bit of a bummer after that for me. But, yeah, I love that scene. I love the honesty of it. You know, you're dead, but haunt me. Like, I'd rather live with you hating me and haunting me than live without you. Mm-hmm. And I love that scene. I was very happy that I got that scene. That was the scene that sort of kept me listening, because I wanted more of that. I wanted more and more of that. But he almost sort of slides into this shade of a character in the second half, and you don't get much of him. You just get him sort of skulking around in the background, treating everyone like shit.
Yeah, because I think he's not alive anymore. He's died, and he's kind of kept in some semi-animation by a desire for revenge. But he's really already dead, and by the time he kind of sees through that revenge, that's when he starts this kind of... he just kind of fades. He's perfectly healthy when he dies, more or less. He just kind of fades away as if into a dream, into a sleep. To join Catherine. He kind of lets go of this great hatred, and he kind of just seems to fade from the page almost. And so while there's sections with Hareton and the other Linton and stuff, and when little Catherine and they're riding around on the pony and all this kind of stuff, where it gets a bit dreary and you're like, you could hurry this up, but there's a kind of complexity to the novel, and I guess those things might become more interesting to me when I'm a father, perhaps, or something like that, when you're observing children and how they behave. There's just so many aspects of this book, and every person who talks about this book as a one of the great classics affirms it as having the classical definition of being a book that pays rereading. That every time you read it, it's different, that you're different, that it keeps coming back to you. And I'm, the aspect of, the love aspect and the idea of madness and the essential connection, to me, is extremely powerful and, very tessellates nicely with my romantic ideas of life and the world and my own emotional feelings and stuff. And if I was in Heathcliff's position and someone took my partner Samira away, I would go mad and, run through the world on a mad revenge quest. It's probably the only way I could ever get rich. Otherwise, I would just not have the motivation unless someone took my love away. So I kind of, I vibe with him. I don't obviously approve of much of the shit he does ever.
That's true. Yeah.
But the essential, dynamic of the novel and how things react to each other, I think, is so philosophically profound and revolutionary for the time, and very important for the evolution of thought and thinking and art, that it's just fantastic. And I think you're right that someone with her artistic genius and work ethic would have definitely produced more brilliant work. She obviously had a lot of to get
such
out of
a
the
shame.
system. Yeah, I mean, there was just so much rampant death around. I mean,
know,
it's so absented even during a pandemic that death still seems absent these days, which I guess is, a great, boon thanks civilization and all that kind of jazz. Things have mightily improved in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it does trickle out. But I thought another aspect which was particularly interesting is the narration and how it's done, because the complexity of it is very interesting and how it builds up. And like I was saying about the ambiguity between characters, and then you're kind of forced to not be judgmental and find this middle ground all the time. That's kind of a very different to Jane Eyre, which is you just get Jane's perspective. And so it does have this wonderful narrative power of throwing you into this world, guiding you along, but not really ever giving you a chance to find your feet. It's like walking on the moors. I know, you're up and down and you're stumbling over rocks and shit. It's never, you're never fully certain of your direction. There's fogs and hazes. You're not really sure what's going on. Sometimes it seeps into a dream, sometimes into a nightmare. Other times it's, all sorts of things, and it mixes with, this kind of Yorkshire folklore and all this stuff. So
yeah.
What did you think of the narration? You were a bit annoyed at Nellie, I gather.
I didn't mind Nellie. I just kind of, it's funny because obviously I was disappointed in the book that you are the character of Lockwood in that Nellie's reading you the tale. And so I got to the end and I was like, fucking hell, that was a bummer of a story. Like, I imagine Lockwood's just sitting there going, what the hell? How did I get stuck into listening to this thing? Whereas you would have been like sitting there being like, oh my God, tell me more, please, keep going. Whereas I was like, I didn't want to hear this. I don't want to hear about this bummer of a character, Heathcliff. But yeah, obviously, yeah.
I like the emotional turmoil. I vibe with that. I recognize that. So, yeah, like you said, I think the second part goes on a bit long, but the general vibe of the effort, I mean, the sheer audacity and ambition of the book, I think, is also fantastic. And I think that's another thing which is why this is also such a writer's book. And so many writers swear by Wuthering Heights, is that it really gives permission for such ambitious writing. For her to attempt this, she finished this book when she was 28. Obviously, she worked multiple drafts, and obviously, someone's first book or any book is not the culmination of. It's the culmination of their whole life in a way. I can't remember who someone said, like, oh, how long did it take you to write this book? And they said, well, I'm 50 years old, so it took 50 years.
Yeah.
And every book is kind of like that. And to such philosophical ambition, and to not attack, but to critique in such an artistic fashion so many aspects of Victorian society, to revolutionize and reshape, remold so many ideas of love, of relationships, connections, ramifications of betrayals, ramifications of self-betrayal, what this does for the self with a capital S. I mean, it's so far ahead of 20th century psychology, that it's stupid, and renders psychology stupid, I mean. So the depth and the scope of the book, I think, is so marvelous, and to be able to do it on just the setting of the moors, which is a great thing. She's thought of as this great nature writer, but she's really just one nature, her patch. She had this distinct epic connection with her patch. I think she only left home a few times, left kind of her Yorkshire, whatever, a few times. She went to Brussels to be a teacher and other things, but she was always homesick in the letters. So kind of critics talk about that, she was able to, which is, great artists do, to use their connection with the natural world to express the turmoil of their relationships and the larger intellectual debates going on at the time, and push them all into one kind of incredible madness of a book.
Yeah.
And everyone at the time was like, this book is madness. And yet it kind of encapsulated everything. I mean, it's I'm very excited to kind of read this book later in life, perhaps when I'm a bit more, hopefully wiser and whatever else. I still obviously, have, I guess it's unsettling because, I'm interested, for someone who does, for lack of a better term, have more of a northern soul in these kind of aspects in terms of your setting and how what did you gather from the nature aspect? Was there particular images that stuck out to you that really thrilled you? Was there darkness and ominous, just from someone who likes Gothic literature and horror and these kind of tones, misty darkness, all this kind of stuff? I would rather, I want my emotional secrets in broad daylight. I want vivid color contrasting against each other. All this kind of mystical, shadowy, kind of liminal in-between spaces with fogs and all this covering. Obviously, the symbolism is great, but the actual aesthetic vibe of it, that's the only part that lacks massive power for me.
Interesting.
Everything else, the intensity of the intellectual intensity, the philosophical intensity, is all really, at absolute the peak octave. But yeah, how did you vibe with the aesthetics of the book?
Yeah, I like you said, I love it. I love the whole misty kind of night. I think that's a lifetime of the Hounds of Baskerville, reading Agatha Christie, which always seems to take place in like a remote place in England, and it's foggy and dark, and there's always some treachery going on. But like you said, she doesn't really go into it that much, that you get this... You do get an image, but there's no particular passage that I can recall thinking, oh yeah, she summed up the Moors really nicely there. It's just kind of this like presence that's always there. That's how I kind of draw away from it. It's the Moors are just there. They're always sort of it's the space between the two houses, Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights. It's just this presence that sits there ominously.
Thrushcross Grange. It sounds like a place you go to kind of sort out an STI.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
But no, that's an interesting idea, because I guess that's part of the magic of it, is that by maintaining this semi-mysticism about the Moors, this slight ambiguity, she's able to morph that in with the emotional landscape of the characters so that it all kind of becomes one. And I think that's what is really revolutionary as well about Wuthering Heights in terms of fiction and building from things like Walter Scott and stuff, is that she's able to portray the emotional world in literature, which before Emily had to kind of be spelled out or said distinctly, when she's able to convey it, not just in the words and in the dialogue and in the, drive me mad, or, if, annihilation and the world would be a stranger to me without my love and all this kind of stuff, which is wonderful. But you also just get this slow build up, this brushwork of the Moors and with the emotional landscape all tied together into this incredibly complex sensation of the book, which I think conveys so much more than the words themselves, which is real magic of prose poetry, and a kind of high achievement. I mean, really revolutionary in terms of what it does for the rest of time, and remaining an influence, and having impacts on music and other aspects. And like you said, you don't get D.H. Lawrence, you don't get so many other writers perhaps in the fashion that they come along if you don't maybe have Wuthering Heights.
Yeah, no, I'd probably agree with that. Like
But I also like the the idea that, as a small or a single thing has such ramifications, that is also always an interesting idea for me. The other night I was watching Howard's End, which is a Merchant Ivory adaptation of an Ian Forster novel, and I nearly picked this for our film adaptation episode because one of the probably my favorite of the Merchant Ivory films, and so beautiful and so well done as an adaptation. Definitely the best of the Ian Forster adaptations, and it's a similar thing in terms of there's a small incident in Howard's End. They decide to not honor the dying mother's wish to give the house Howard's End to this stranger Margaret, and the whole rest of the book is just this slow descension of you could see it as like bad luck. This family's life keeps getting entwined with these others, the Margarets, the Schlegen's life, and slowly it all kind of unravels, and actually the original wish comes true at the cost of the whole family that tried to subdue it in the first place. And so you just get this initial episode of dishonesty, of betrayal in some way, and the ramifications of that down the generations and what it does to people in terms of guilt and shame, and also just how the universe in inverted commas attacks them for their sins. And of course that's the same in Catherine's decision, or in Earnshaw's decision to grab this kid off the streets, and just the massive ramifications of such a momentary decision happens. And I don't know, I always find that to be a very engrossing aspect of the story.
I think, just thinking about that, I think one of the things that I really don't like about the book is the first half is wonderful, and then the second half, after Catherine's died, like I said, Heathcliff kind of slides into this almost a side character. He's just this, like the Moors, just a presence in the background. And there's sort of not a way around it, given the way she the way she wrote the story is through Nellie. But I would have liked to have seen his descent a bit more firsthand. I would have liked to have known what he was feeling to drive him into this state, because he inflicts 18 years of basically just pure hatred, and it's often on people that had nothing to do with the initial moment. He's so incredibly cruel to the second Kathy, Kathy's daughter Kathy. It's a bit annoying they name him Kathy, but
all the names are an absolute...
The names are a nightmare in this book. But I
think that's also kind of like a satirical point about male ownership of things, and
it could be,
inheritance and property is all passed down, and it's just absurd. And then Heathcliff has no other name. Yeah,
that's true. But
anyway,
that's a good
sorry.
point. No. I just wanted to see more of Heathcliff. I just wanted to know what he was thinking to drive him. Because, like I said, he's so incredibly cruel to Kathy. What's his thoughts behind that? Where's his mental state? Obviously, he's lost his soul, the love of his life, but that doesn't necessarily mean for 18 years you have to be incredibly cruel to basically someone that had nothing to do with it.
I kind of see him as a juggernaut, or something which is just hurtling through space, belligerent. I don't even think there's much. I mean, no, there is kind of a malice. There's a malice of someone getting in his way because he's determined to take his revenge. But he doesn't really see them as people. He's just like barging through them. He doesn't care what cruelty happens to them. Doesn't even imagine it to himself. He's just kind of hurtling through other people if they get in his way, or if he needs them. And any refusal on their part to resist behaving the way he wants them to behave, then he will act as cruelly as required to force them into some kind of relinquishing of their faculties or whatever. So I don't know, he's just hell-bent, and that's it. But I thought, we'll come to the end here, but I thought we should, as perhaps not as good the second half of the novel is, the last 3 paragraphs are astoundingly good.
Or
Or did you have any more quotes that you wanted to jump from? Or
There was there was one scene that really made me laugh in the second half. I don't have the quote for it, but Kathy the younger, little Kathy is having this sort of moment of realizing people are dying, and she's talking to Nellie, and Kathy's like, "Oh my god, like you guys are older than me. My dad's gonna die, and then you're gonna die, and I'm gonna be left alone." And then Nellie turns around and says, "Don't worry, Kathy, you might die first." And I was like, what the fuck? Nellie, what the hell? And she's purely just like, "Don't worry about it, little Kathy. There's a chance you could die before us." You're meant to be like guiding this child, and you're like, "Nope, you could just be dead before us."
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just capricious death. I mean, everyone was dying all over the place. If you made it past 30, you were an old woman. I don't know. I mean, it's so interesting. We forget. We think back to all these people and all these bad marriages and all this bad blood, and but people just married as soon as possible because they assumed that they were going to die at around 30. So
I guess that's another thing about Heathcliff, is that, like you said, he dies in perfectly good health, and like you were saying, he's a juggernaut. Like, everyone else seems to get sick so quickly and die within a few days or weeks, whereas Heathcliff is just constantly like healthy and good, even though he's the one suffering the most.
Yeah, and it's not like he's some mature figure who can deal with these emotions with the hindsight of other emotions or other experiences. He's in his teens when I mean, he's not even 20 when he marries Isabella, so he's still a teenager when he sets out on this revenge mission. So he's still got the tempestuousness of puberty and all this kind of stuff to power him through, and he just he can never grow out of it because he dies basically as a lost child. I think that's also what Wuthering Heights is. Wuthering Heights is a place where you die young. It's a place of lost people and ghosts and all this kind of thing. It's really, there's no maturity there. I mean, even the servants don't really grow old in a way. They kind of just keep on. Whereas in Thrushcroft Grange, there's authority and there's division and there's a sense of wisdom coming from above or something like that. But so I think that's also got to do with it. These kids are kind of cut off and treated like savages very cruelly, and so no one at Wuthering Heights, the help accepted, living their own lives which are kind of separate from the story, learns how to love, and they have to suffer their whole lives. That's the only way you can mature in life. There's no other way. No matter how many suits you buy or properties you own or whatever, unless you can learn how to love, then you don't know how to accept personal responsibility, then you're destined to live a kind of a life in decline, no matter how high you think you rise. But I thought, these last 3 paragraphs I think are just beautiful and so magnificent in terms of 19th century and high romantic prose. So this is the very end, and up in the cemetery, Catherine's buried and Edgar is buried, and now Heathcliff is buried next to Catherine, where he wants to be and where he even tried to be when he was alive. Yeah. And this is Lockwood, and he's kind of comes back to the area to kind of see what happens to these people. Then he goes for a stroll past the cemetery. My walk home was lengthened by a diversion in the direction of the kirk, when beneath its walls I perceived decay had made progress, even in 7 months. Many a window showed black gaps deprived of glass, and slats jutted off, here and there, beyond the right line of the roof, to be gradually worked off in coming autumn storms. I sought and soon discovered the three headstones on the slope next to the moor, the middle one grey and half buried in heath, Edgar Linton's only harmonised by the turf and moss creeping up its foot, Heathcliff's still bare. I lingered round them under that benign sky, watched the moths fluttering among the heath, and harebells, listened to the soft wind breathing through the grass, and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth. Which is fuck.
Yeah.
Just what an ending. And after the haunting of all the book, to kind of basically come here and have the audacity as a writer to tell people, like, this is how it ends. I'm telling you what's going on. These people are finally sleeping soundly after all their haunting. Who could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth?
Yeah. Oof. I know.
I mean, that really ties everything up, as much as the latter half was a bit tedious at times. Worth it for the kind of...
Brings it home nicely.
Culminating the bow.
Yeah. I love that ending. We were just robbed of such a poetic voice. It's such a shame. I would have loved to have seen the second and the third book.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Jane is the only really one of the sisters that got much work out, and she only lived to like 38. So none of them, they all died out within like a 40-year period, all the Brontes. But astounding influence. I don't know. And Anne obviously wrote some books as well, which I haven't read, but apparently they're still readable. But yeah, I mean, you always have those ideas. What else would Keats have written? What else would Emily Brontë have written? But yeah, astounding. Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering Heights, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Well, what were you reading this week other than Wuthering Heights? Although we were both reading that. So maybe, did you read anything this week?
Yeah. I started reading Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. So quite a good book. I won't say too much on it because I know we are planning an ep within the next few weeks.
I want to read that. It's been on my list.
But it's split into two sort of sections. So Shakespeare's the father, but he's never actually named, or so far he hasn't been named. So I assume I'm nearly halfway through. He's not going to be named, but half the story is about his marriage to Agnes and how that sort of comes about. And then the second half is about Hamnet, his son, and how his son dies. That's where I'm up to. That's where I'll leave it. Don't want to spoil too much, obviously. But yeah, quite well written so far. Very sparse, very interesting. Loving it. Keen to do an episode on it. But what about you? What were you reading this week?
Well, I have been reading Nightwood by Djuna Barnes. One of the great novels of high modernism. I had never read this. I had read bits of Djuna Barnes before. She has a very famous journalistic career. She, had probably wrote one of the greatest essays on Joyce, and she knew Joyce and was friends with all those people. She was there in the 1920s in Paris with everyone, and she lived until she was like 90 years old and basically hated most of her life. She was like, why am I living? All my friends are dead. I hate this. And she lived across the road from E.E. Cummings, apparently, and he used to open his window like every few years and be like, Djuna, are you still alive? She'd be like, fuck off. But Nightwood is brilliant. I'm about halfway through. It's I guess what I kind of expected. She's extremely witty and she has extremely witty characters. It's very I can't really go into it. It does have a plot, but maybe we can do an episode on it. But the plot's not so important. It's more about just these kind of spikes of meaning which pop out, and these kind of, it seems like a bit of a mess. It's kind of loosely tied together, but then there'll just be some insanely well constructed line that just jumps out at you, and kind of then will trail with you for days, and you'll kind of remember it. There's so I'm really enjoying that. I don't have any quotes to hand, but I thought the quote from Djuna Barnes, which initially interested in me and her many years ago, I was watching an episode of QI, and at the end of QI, I don't know if Sandy Toksvig, who's the new host, still does it, but at the end, usually Stephen Fry would just kind of give some quirky quote at the very end, which would be loosely related to the topic of the episode. And one week, it was a Djuna Barnes quote where she says something along the lines of, "If the world was a rational place, it would be men who ride side saddle."
Yes.
And
we did this because we had to study Djuna Barnes for a modernism class at university.
Have you read Nightwood?
No. That was one of the weeks that I just tuned out for a week to take a break. Yeah, a book a week was too much when you're doing 4 classes and each one a book read a week.
It's an intense book, so it's something which I'm really enjoying dipping into, and it's not that long. You know, it's I think Jeanette Winterson described it as shorter than Finnegan's Wake, but more readable. Which is not hard because Finnegan's Wake is completely unreadable, but it's got, you know, that high modernist vibe where you kind of, you know, I can imagine where people must react to it being like, pretentious twaddle. But there's so much depth in it, and so many little trails which, if, you know, with a bit of prior knowledge or with a bit of a sense of what she's trying to do, is incredibly interesting. Yeah. So that's, I'm really enjoying that.
Brilliant. Yeah. We can do an episode on it if you like.
Nightwood, Djuna Barnes.
Nightwood, nice.
Well, that was a lovely ep, Wuthering Heights.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. Yeah, very good. Very good indeed. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
I wish you all quiet slumbers.
Yeah, we'll catch you next week.
Toodaloo.
Ciao.